to pull the slack out, and there's a lot of slack in. Let me just quickly, we won't quickly, we were going to go to Reuters, but we'll actually go to a speech or summary of speech by Dudley of the Fed, which we'll get to in a minute here. Here we go. Now, this was the speech that he gave in Boston. Is the use of microprudential tools institutionally realistic? Now, let me just kind of summarize what he did. It is a pleasure to be here. Well, we'll skip all that, but anyway, I'd like to make a few general comments on microprudential tools. I am interested in such tools both as a U.S. policymaker in my role as chair of the Committee of Global Financial Systems of the Bank for International Settlement, a body that has done considerable work in the area in recent years. The use of microprudential tools has gotten considerable attention for several reasons. Some countries have implemented microprudential measurements with respect to their housing market that has limited the extent of housing price appreciation and made their financial system more resilient when booms unwind. Other countries have implemented countercyclical capital requirements that have made the banking system more reliant. Thus, the hope in the U.S. policymakers could learn from these international experiments and incorporate effective microprudential tools into our toolkit that could be used to limit financial stability risks. That's the whole idea here. Support for using microprudential tools in the United States has also been boasted by our experience during the Depression. My word, not his. He called it financial crisis. The U.S. housing boom and substantial subsequent busts might have been less severe had a set of microprudential measurements been in place at the time to limit the degree of leverage and speculative activity in the housing sector. The housing sector boom was fueled by optimistic expectation for housing price appreciation combined with tax underwriting standards embedded in such practices as no-doc mortgages, widespread speculative activity by investors. I remember, for example, the website condoflip.com, which said all in terms of degree of speculation fever that was evident at the time. If underwriting practices had been held to a higher standard, that is, strict mortgage service to income ratio that had been honored and speculative activity had been constrained, that is, by lower loan to value ceilings for investors with multiple mortgage liens outstanding. This might have limited the size of the boom and the subsequent bust. In my own view, while the use of microprudential tools holds promise, we're a long ways from being able to successfully use such tools in the U.S. There are two major sets of difficulties. First, unlike monetary policy and microprudential regulation, there is not a well-defined framework for identifying emerging imbalances and applying microprudential tools in response. A recent tabletop exercise conducted by a number of Federal Reserve presidents, which I will discuss a bit later. A workshop held by the Committee on Global Financial Systems earlier this year in Hong Kong also noted the difficulty. Approximate calibration of microprudential tools is difficult because of a lack of data and information about how the transmission process works. That is what impacts the tools will have on the sector. even assessing the impact ex post is challenging because it's difficult to predict how the macroeconomic and financial system would have evolved if the microprudential tools had been in place. Second, in the U.S., even if such framework existed, there would still be a problem in terms of timely implementation. The U.S. regulatory structure is fragmented. That has always been a problem, so that in most cases no single regulator is able to implement microprudential tools in a comprehensive manner that can be corrected. As a result, imposing microprudential tools in the U.S. would almost certainly leverage significant gaps in coverage. Such gaps would likely lead to distortions within the financial sector, as the tools would have different impacts across financial intermediaries inside versus outside a particular regulatory boundary. It is important to note that regulatory mandates from numerous federal and state regulatory authorities differ considerably. Some simply may not view financial stability as an important part of their mandate. As a result, I suspect it would be difficult to get all the relevant information on board in a timely way to implement. In principle, Financial Stability Oversight Council, the FSOC, might be well placed to coordinate the response, but I believe it's likely to prove to be difficult to do in practice. Even each of the regulatory agencies on their own, that could be taken care of by legislation. In the remainder of my time, I'll discuss two topics in more detail. First, discuss briefly what we learned at a tabletop exercise with a number of Fed bank presidents. Let me just get to that. The tabletop exercises, 5 federal bank presidents who were members of the subcommittee. Prudential tools under consideration include capital requirement tools, including change in leverage ratio requirements, impositioning of countercyclical capital buffers, and higher differentiation of capital requirements for commercial real estate exposures. Liquidation tools such as changes in liquidation coverage ratio and net stability fund ratio. Credit-based tools such as limits on loans to value ratio. Supervisory guidelines, stress testing is already done. Monetary policy also considered as a tool, each as a component of the substitute. It's noteworthy that in the discussion there were no agreement as to which tools should be emphasized and their order in which. Not good. In general, the exercise identifies several issues with respect to the use of microprudential tools. One issue was the perceived difficulty of coordinating among different regulators. We won't go over that. He's already talked about that. Automatic rules that are always in place have several advantages over discretionary measures, no doubt about that. Secondly, they avoid some of the problems associated with announcing that a new measure is going to be put in place. When implementing a new measure, there's always will be some reluctance to overcome in terms of deciding whether it's necessary. Also, there is a political opposition to imposing a new measure. Now, let me just go back up here. Now we turn to ex-ante hand-wired microprudential tool standards that Adam has, well, we don't know what Adam discussed, imposing automatic countercyclical standards also has its difficulty to some degree, but I think it's much less severe because of the time such standards are put in place. They generally will not be binding and will be more binding in the future. In the same vein, automatic rules that are imposed ex ante might also be less risky in terms of potential unintended consequences. For brevity, I'm skipping around here. So I see the same potential advantage of hardwire rules, but I think this advantage needs to be set against the practical difficulty of figuring out what rules might need to be in place to deal with all potential financial stability excesses that occur in the future. It seems a very difficult task to work it out, in my opinion. It implies that such rules would need to be designed to treat broad issues such as increase in financial system leverage or aggregated credit growth rather than a more limited secular issues. Okay. Historical experience suggests that past bubbles in the U.S. that have threatened the financial stability have taken many different forms and occur in response to some important innovation in the economy or the development of instruments that facilitate real estate lending to lower qualified borrowers. For example, they include the development of the internet technology stock boom of the late 90s and the subprime crisis there. These innovations in turn spark changes in belief systems. He's turning to a sociologist here, that housing is an excellent investment and that national home price can never decline. Silly. When the assumption that widely support a boom is revealed as false, the consequence is often a sharp reversal in behavior. Dr. Greenspan talked about irrational exuberance and the price for the boom deflates. Prices, and I think it's very hard to anticipate these episodes and putting rules in place that would limit such excesses. Not actually. My concern is that we over-engineer the financial system, building in a complexity to respond to potential risks that might or might not manifest themselves in the future. The complexity might not gain us as much in terms of greater financial stability, either because the problems that ultimately manifest itself was difficult than we planned. And we finish up. In the meanwhile, while we work to sort all this out, we should take a considerable solace from the fact that we have made the financial system more resilient to shocks, no doubt. We may not be able to anticipate the next area of excesses, but with higher capital and liquidity requirements, which they have now, but not as high as they should, stress testing to assess the emerging vulnerabilities, I think we are a better place than we have been in the past. Well, Dr. Dudley here in his remarks are interesting at best, but what I would say is that better predictive models can be developed, and it is an ongoing process. And as far as dealing with urban legends, we won't call them urban legends, but popular myths that housing prices will go up and will never come down, based upon especially the experience of in California. We can get around that very, very quickly. We have historic precedent for that. It's not that we have to go around guessing about how that will occur in the future. Nonetheless, let's move on to the market, as they say. Move to Reuters here very, very quickly here and pick up a couple of comments with a weak report here, comment combined with some other weakness that are seen across the globe. The odds get dimmer for December. What he's talking about is Tom Porcelli. He's an economist at RBC Capital Markets. What he's talking about here is the Fed raising the rate. Bets on interest rate futures show investors only saw a 30% chance of the Fed rate hike in December, down from 50%. So in other words, it's a gambling game.